It began as a private conversation behind palace doors, one so sensitive that even senior aides were ordered to leave the room. When Prince William emerged, witnesses described him as pale, shaken, and unable to hide his emotions. Within hours, whispers spread through royal corridors. The king had made a final decision about the future of the throne, and for the first time in years, the heir to the crown appeared completely unprepared for what he had heard. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The British monarchy has survived wars, scandals, abdications, and generations of uncertainty. It has weathered storms that seemed capable of shaking its very foundations. Yet according to growing whispers inside royal circles, few moments have carried the emotional weight of what unfolded behind closed palace doors that day. The meeting itself was arranged with unusual urgency. There was no public schedule, no advance notice, and no indication that anything extraordinary was about to occur. Even among senior members of the royal household, knowledge of the gathering was tightly restricted. Those who normally moved freely through the king's inner circle suddenly found themselves excluded. Questions were asked, but answers never came. King Charles had personally requested the meeting with Prince William. That fact alone was enough to spark concern. For months, conversations about the future had been quietly taking place within the highest levels of the monarchy. The king's ongoing health challenges had forced difficult discussions that many hoped could be postponed for years. Yet time has a way of demanding decisions when people least expect them. Reports suggest that only a small group of trusted advisors attended the meeting alongside the king and his eldest son. The atmosphere surrounding the gathering was reportedly unlike anything palace staff had witnessed in recent memory. Security measures were heightened, access was restricted. Even longtime aides were instructed to remain at a distance. As the hours passed, tension spread throughout the royal household. Staff members who had spent years serving the family began noticing subtle signs that something significant was unfolding. Conversations became shorter, expressions became harder to read, doors remained closed. It was the kind of silence that often speaks louder than words. Then came the moment that truly fueled speculation. When William finally emerged, those who saw him immediately sensed a profound change. This was not the composed future king the public had come to know. Witnesses reportedly described a man carrying the weight of information he never expected to receive that day. His expression revealed shock. His posture reflected exhaustion. Whatever had been discussed inside that room had clearly left a mark. Within hours, rumors raced through royal corridors. Senior courtiers refused to comment. Advisors declined to offer explanations. Official channels remained silent. Yet silence only intensified the mystery. Media insiders who closely monitor palace affairs began suggesting that tensions had been building for months beneath the surface. Some claimed unusual meetings had quietly taken place. Others pointed to subtle shifts in royal planning that now seemed impossible to ignore. Looking back, many believed the signs had been there all along. They simply had not understood what they were pointing toward. As speculation grew, one question dominated every conversation. What could King Charles possibly have told William that would provoke such an emotional response? This was a man raised from birth to understand duty, sacrifice, and responsibility. He had spent decades preparing for the day he would eventually inherit the throne. Yet insiders now whispered that the king's final decision challenged assumptions that had guided royal expectations for years. It was not merely a matter of succession. It was something larger, something deeper, something capable of altering the future path of the crown itself. And perhaps most unsettling of all was the growing belief that this decision had not been made overnight. Reports suggested it was the culmination of months of reflection, private consultations, and deeply personal considerations. The king had reached a conclusion. William had heard it. And now the consequences were beginning to ripple outward through the monarchy. What started as a tightly guarded conversation was rapidly becoming one of the most significant royal mysteries in recent memory, leaving many to wonder whether the institution itself was standing on the edge of a transformation few had anticipated. But what William heard that day was not simply a family decision. It threatened to reshape the future of the monarchy itself. For months, concern had been growing behind the gilded walls of the royal household. Public appearances were carefully managed. Official statements remained measured. Yet those closest to the king understood that time was becoming a factor no one could ignore. The uncertainty that followed William's emotional meeting with his father did not emerge from nowhere. In truth, it had been building quietly for a very long time. Long before whispers began spreading through palace corridors, A sense of unease had settled over the royal household. It lingered beneath official engagements, beneath carefully worded statements, and beneath the reassuring public image that the monarchy worked tirelessly to maintain. While the nation saw continuity, stability, and tradition, those closest to the center of royal life were confronting a far more complicated reality. Questions that once belonged to the distant future were suddenly becoming immediate concerns. At the heart of those concerns stood King Charles. Ever since news's health challenges emerged, the monarchy had entered unfamiliar territory. The king continued fulfilling his duties with determination, refusing to allow personal struggles to define his reign. Yet even the strongest sense of duty cannot stop the passage of time. Advisors, family members, and senior palace officials understood this difficult truth. Every decision now carried greater significance. Every appearance was carefully considered. Every conversation seemed connected to a larger question that no one could openly discuss for very long. What happens next? As that question grew louder behind closed doors, discussions about succession began intensifying, not publicly, not formally, but quietly, steadily, and with increasing urgency. The future of the crown was no longer an abstract concept reserved for constitutional experts and historians. It had become a matter of immediate importance. The institution had to be prepared for every possibility. Plans that had remained untouched for years were reviewed once more. Strategies were examined. Contingencies were updated. What had once seemed distant suddenly felt remarkably close. For Prince William, these developments carried a weight unlike anything he had experienced before. He had spent his entire life understanding that one day he would inherit the throne. It was a responsibility woven into every chapter of his journey. Yet preparing in theory and preparing in reality are very different things. As discussions intensified around him, the future king found himself confronting the enormous expectations attached to his destiny. The role he had spent decades observing was gradually transforming into the role he might soon be required to fulfill. The pressure was immense, the responsibility was staggering, and the emotional burden was becoming impossible to ignore. Throughout this period, Catherine emerged as one of the monarchy's most important sources of stability. While uncertainty spread through royal circles, she remained a steady presence behind the scenes. Those close to the family understood how much support she provided during moments of private strain. Her ability to remain composed helped create calm during a period increasingly defined by anxiety. As William carried the growing weight of future responsibilities, Catherine became both partner and confidant, helping him navigate conversations that would have overwhelmed many others. At the same time, senior advisors found themselves focused on a question that extended beyond succession itself. They began examining how King Charles wished to be remembered. Legacy became a recurring theme in private discussions. Not simply the legacy of a monarch, but the legacy of a father, a son, and a man who had spent more than 7 decades preparing for a role unlike any other. The king understood that history would eventually judge his reign. The challenge was determining what kind of future he wanted to leave behind. As these conversations deepened, the throne itself became the center of increasingly urgent deliberations. Decisions that once seemed straightforward now carried profound consequences. Every path forward appeared to involve sacrifice. Every solution raised new questions. And somewhere within those private discussions, King Charles was reaching conclusions known only to a select few. Conclusions that would soon alter the course of royal history. And as preparations continued in secret, the king was crafting a decision that would leave even his closest family members stunned. When details of the king's final proposal began circulating among trusted insiders, disbelief spread rapidly. This was not the outcome many had predicted. In fact, it challenged assumptions that had guided royal planning for years. The growing mystery surrounding King Charles's private decision reached a new level the moment fragments of information began leaking through royal circles. At first, many dismissed the rumors as exaggeration. The monarchy has always been surrounded by speculation, and palace corridors have never been short of theories about the future. Yet this felt different. The reactions coming from those closest to the institutions suggested that something genuinely unexpected had occurred. The more people learned, the harder it became to ignore a simple truth. The king's vision for the future was not following the path many had anticipated. For decades, royal planning had rested upon traditions that seemed almost unshakable. There were expectations about succession, expectations about authority, and expectations about how power would gradually transfer from one generation to the next. Those expectations had shaped countless discussions among advisors, historians, and members of the royal family themselves. Yet Charles appeared determined to challenge some of those assumptions. According to growing whispers, his proposal was not focused on preserving tradition for its own sake. Instead, it centered on protecting the institution above all else. The crown itself had become his primary concern. That distinction may seem subtle, but within royal circles it carried enormous consequences. Tradition and institution are often spoken of as though they are one and the same. Charles reportedly saw them differently. As he reflected on the challenges facing the monarchy, he appeared increasingly focused on what would ensure its survival in the decades ahead. His decision was not simply about the next reign. It was about the long-term stability of the crown and the role it would play in a rapidly changing world. That perspective surprised many who expected a more conventional approach. The proposal reportedly caught several senior royals completely off guard. Some had spent years assuming they understood how the future would unfold. Suddenly, those assumptions no longer seemed reliable. Questions emerged almost immediately. Why now? What had convinced the king that such a dramatic step was necessary? Had he been considering this course of action for years, or had recent events accelerated his thinking? The absence of clear answers only deepened the intrigue. For William, the situation became deeply personal. More than anyone else, he found himself trapped between two powerful forces. On one side stood duty, the responsibility he had embraced throughout his life. On the other stood expectations, many of which had been carefully built over decades. Reconciling those realities was far from easy. The future king understood the importance of protecting the monarchy, yet understanding a decision and accepting it are often two very different things. Reports suggest he wrestled privately with the implications, attempting to understand not only what his father had decided, but why he had decided it. Meanwhile, advisors began debating the long-term consequences. Some believed the proposal represented a bold act of leadership designed to secure the monarchy's future. Others worried it could create unforeseen complications for generations to come. Private discussions grew increasingly intense as officials attempted to evaluate every possible outcome. The king's decision was no longer viewed as a simple administrative matter. It had become a defining question about the future direction of the institution itself. As these debates unfolded, divisions quietly emerged within royal circles. Not open conflicts, not public disagreements, but subtle differences in perspective that revealed just how significant the proposal had become. Some believed change was necessary. Others feared the risks that change might bring. Yet beneath every argument lay a shared concern for the future of the crown. What kind of monarchy would exist 20 years from now? What burdens would future generations inherit? And what sacrifices would be required to protect the institution during uncertain times? Those questions continued growing louder as William reflected on everything he had learned. The deeper he looked beneath the surface, the more he sensed that his father's decision was about far more than succession, protocol, or public perception. There was another layer to the story, a deeper motivation hidden beneath the headlines and speculation. And as he began piecing those clues together, an entirely different picture started to emerge. Yet, the deeper William examined the king's reasoning, the more he realized there was a hidden purpose behind the shocking decision. Behind every royal decree lies a personal story, and this one reached far beyond politics, titles, and ceremony. It touched on a father's final hopes, his deepest fears, and the legacy he wished to leave behind. As speculation continued to spread through royal circles, William found himself looking beyond the headlines, beyond the rumors, and beyond the immediate shock that had followed his father's decision. The more he reflected on it, the more he realized that this was not simply a constitutional matter. It was deeply personal. Hidden beneath discussions about succession and the future of the crown was the story of a man who had spent most of his life preparing for a role that finally arrived only after decades of waiting. To understand the king's decision, William needed to understand the journey that had shaped it. For much of his life, Charles existed in a position unlike any other. He spent decades as heir to the throne, carrying responsibilities without possessing ultimate authority. He witnessed political change, social transformation, and generational shifts while standing just one step away from history itself. During those years, he learned lessons that few people could ever truly understand. He experienced the pressures of expectation. He endured criticism. He faced moments of triumph and moments of disappointment. Most importantly, he gained a unique perspective on what it meant to preserve an institution that constantly had to evolve in order to survive. Many of those lessons were shaped by his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Throughout her historic reign, She became a symbol of continuity during periods of extraordinary change. Charles observed her dedication firsthand. He witnessed the sacrifices required to maintain public trust. He saw how difficult decisions were often made not for personal benefit but for the long-term stability of the monarchy itself. Those memories remained with him long after he became king. In many ways, they became the foundation upon which he built his own understanding of duty. Public trust increasingly weighed on his mind. Reports suggest that Charles spent considerable time reflecting on the future relationship between the monarchy and the people it serves. The institution had survived because generations of monarchs understood that public confidence could never be taken for granted. It had to be earned continuously. That belief reportedly played a significant role in shaping his final decision. Protecting the monarchy was no longer just about preserving tradition. It was about ensuring relevance, credibility, and stability for future generations. As William considered these factors, private conversations with his father began returning to him. Discussions that once seemed routine suddenly carried new meaning. Advice that once felt abstract now sounded remarkably direct. Over the years, Charles had spoken often about responsibility, sacrifice, and the burden that accompanies leadership. At the time, William viewed those conversations as preparation for a distant future. Now he understood they had been preparing him for this very moment. The emotional burden behind the king's decision became impossible to ignore. Charles was not simply making plans for the institution. He was confronting difficult realities about his own legacy. Every choice carried consequences. Every path forward required compromise. As both a monarch and a father, he faced a challenge that would test anyone. Personal feelings pointed in one direction. Institutional duty pointed in another. The tension between those forces shaped every aspect of his thinking. That reality struck William with particular force. He could see the painful contrast at the center of his father's decision. Family loyalty remained deeply important, yet the survival of the monarchy had been placed above individual preferences. Charles appeared willing to accept personal heartbreak if he believed it would strengthen the institution he had spent his life serving. It was a choice rooted not in comfort but in responsibility. The deeper William explored his father's reasoning, the clearer the picture became. What initially seemed shocking now revealed itself as the culmination of decades of experience, reflection, and sacrifice. Yet understanding the logic behind the decision did not erase its emotional impact. If anything, it made the situation even more difficult. Because once the reasoning became clear, so did the enormous consequences that would follow. And those consequences were no longer theoretical. They were beginning to emerge in ways that would affect every corner of royal life. But understanding the decision did not make accepting it any easier, especially once its consequences began to unfold. Those present would later describe the moment as one of the most emotional scenes witnessed inside royal walls in years. The pressure, responsibility, and uncertainty finally collided all at once. By the time William fully understood the consequences of his father's decision, the emotional strain he had been carrying for months became almost impossible to contain. The weight of expectation had always been part of his life. From the moment he was born, the future of the monarchy had rested, in part, on his shoulders. Yet there is a profound difference between knowing responsibility is coming and suddenly feeling it standing directly in front of you. For William, that realization arrived with overwhelming force. The future was no longer a distant chapter waiting to be written. It felt immediate, unavoidable, and closer than ever before. Those closest to him reportedly noticed the change almost immediately. The steady confidence that had defined much of his public role remained intact, but beneath the surface, the burden was growing heavier with each passing day. Every discussion seemed to carry greater significance. Every decision appeared connected to a future that was arriving faster than anyone expected. The king's revelation had transformed private concerns into unavoidable realities. William was no longer simply preparing for what might happen someday. He was preparing for what could happen next. During this period, Catherine became an essential source of strength. As uncertainty intensified around the family, she remained one of the few constants William could rely upon. Their partnership had already endured enormous challenges, but this moment demanded something different. It required resilience, patience, and emotional stability at a time when pressure seemed to be closing in from every direction. While speculation continued to grow outside palace walls, Catherine helped create a sense of calm within them. Her presence became a reminder that even during periods of extraordinary uncertainty, some foundations remained unshaken. Meanwhile, senior aides found themselves fighting a different battle. Rumors surrounding the king's decision were spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Every unanswered question created new theories. Every private meeting generated fresh speculation. Advisors worked tirelessly to contain the growing wave of curiosity, carefully managing information while attempting to prevent unnecessary panic. Yet the harder they tried to control the narrative, the more intense public interest became. Silence often creates its own headlines, and that silence was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Inside the wider royal family, reactions varied considerably. Some approached the situation with quiet concern. Others reportedly struggled to conceal their surprise. Different perspectives emerged as family members attempted to understand both the reasoning behind the king's decision and the impact it might have on the future. For some, the proposal represented necessary preparation. For others, it raised difficult questions about change, tradition, and the direction of the monarchy itself. What united them all was the growing realization that something significant was unfolding. As weeks passed, the future began to feel more immediate than ever. Conversations that once focused on long-term possibilities now centered on practical realities. Advisors reviewed plans. Family members reassessed expectations. The monarchy seemed to be entering a period unlike any it had experienced in recent years. Beneath every discussion lingered the same unsettling thought. The next chapter might arrive sooner than anyone had anticipated. Public appearances became subject to intense scrutiny as observers searched for clues about what was happening behind the scenes. Every gesture attracted attention. Every statement was analyzed. Every interaction generated speculation. The pressure on William increased accordingly. Millions saw a future king carrying out his duties with professionalism and determination. Few could fully appreciate the emotional struggle taking place beneath that composed exterior. For William, the challenge was becoming impossible to ignore. The responsibilities he had long prepared for were no longer theoretical. They were real. They were approaching. And with every passing day, he found himself confronting the reality of what lay ahead. It was a realization filled with duty, uncertainty, sacrifice, the profound understanding that his life was on the verge of changing forever. Yet even as he wrestled with those emotions, another development was already taking shape. The king's decision was no longer confined to private conversations. It was beginning to ripple outward through the entire royal household, setting the stage for reactions that would soon emerge from every direction. As news of the king's decision quietly spread through palace corridors, reactions began emerging from every corner of the royal family. The king's decision did not remain confined to one room for long. Like a stone dropped into still water, its impact spread outward, touching every branch of the royal household. What had begun as a closely guarded discussion between a father and his heir was now evolving into something much larger. The shockwaves generated by the king's decision were moving steadily through the monarchy, reaching individuals who had spent years believing they understood the future. Suddenly, certainty was becoming scarce. Questions multiplied. Assumptions collapsed. And within the walls of the royal household, a growing sense of anticipation mixed with unease as everyone attempted to understand what the future might now hold. Senior members of the royal family were among the first to feel the impact. Although public silence remained firmly in place, private conversations reportedly became more frequent and increasingly urgent. Family members who had once viewed the future through a relatively predictable lens now found themselves reassessing everything. The king's decision had altered the conversation. It was no longer simply about succession. It was about direction, about priorities, about the type of monarchy that would emerge in the years ahead. For some, the proposal represented necessary evolution. For others, it raised concerns about uncertainty and change. Yet even among differing opinions, one reality was impossible to deny. The future was arriving faster than expected. At the same time, advisors throughout the royal institution found themselves reviewing plans that had long been considered settled. Years of preparation suddenly required fresh examination. Long-term strategies were revisited. Contingencies were updated. Discussions once considered theoretical became immediate priorities. The king's choice had introduced a new variable into an already delicate situation, forcing senior officials to prepare for outcomes that had previously seemed unlikely. Every scenario was studied carefully because the consequences of miscalculation could extend far beyond a single generation. Among palace staff, a similar mood began to emerge. While many were not directly involved in the decision-making process, they could sense the shift taking place around them. Subtle changes in routine, increased levels of confidentiality, a noticeable rise in closed-door meetings. Together, these developments created an atmosphere of quiet expectation. Staff members understood that something significant was unfolding, even if they did not yet know the full story. The institution they served appeared to be approaching a turning point. Outside palace walls, speculation intensified at a remarkable pace. Public interest grew, as rumors continued circulating through media channels and social discussions. Every appearance by a senior royal attracted renewed scrutiny. Every statement was analyzed for hidden meaning. Every interaction generated fresh theories. The absence of clear answers only fueled curiosity for further. The more people searched for certainty, the more elusive it seemed to become. As pressure mounted, long-standing relationships within royal circles faced unexpected tests. Individuals who had spent years aligned on major issues occasionally found themselves viewing the king's decision through very different perspectives. Some believed decisive action was necessary to secure the future. Others worried about the risks associated with dramatic change. These disagreements rarely surfaced publicly, but beneath the surface they revealed the complexity of the moment. Loyalty to family, loyalty to tradition, and loyalty to the institution were not always pointing in the same direction. Meanwhile, new power dynamics quietly began to emerge. The growing importance of certain voices became increasingly apparent. Individuals once considered supporting figures found themselves playing larger roles in discussions about the future. Others discovered that influence they had long relied upon no longer carried the same weight. The monarchy was adjusting to a new reality, and with that adjustment came inevitable shifts in authority and responsibility. The result was a period of profound uncertainty, not chaos. Not crisis, but uncertainty nonetheless. The institution remained stable, yet its future path seemed less predictable than it had only months earlier. Beneath the surface, significant changes were taking shape. The king's decision had become more than a private matter. It had become a defining issue capable of influencing the monarchy for years to come. Yet for all the discussion, planning, and speculation surrounding the revelation, one crucial mystery remained unresolved. Advisors debated its consequences. Family members debated its meaning. Observers debated its implications. But almost no one seemed able to answer the question at the heart of the entire story. Why had Charles chosen this particular moment to act? Why now, after years of patience, preparation, and restraint? The answer, according to those closest to the situation, would reveal more about the king's true intentions than anyone had yet imagined. Yet amid the confusion and speculation, one question remained unanswered. Why had the king chosen this exact moment? As the dust began to settle, attention turned to the message at the heart of the king's decision. It was more than a strategy, more than a constitutional calculation. It was a statement about the future he believed Britain needed. For weeks, discussions about the decision had focused on its consequences. Advisors analyzed it. Family members debated it. Observers speculated about what it might mean for the future of the crown. Yet beneath all those conversations lay a more important question. What was the king actually trying to say? What principle was so important that it justified a decision capable of surprising even those closest to him? As answers slowly emerged, a clearer picture began to take shape. This was never simply about power. It was about purpose. According to those familiar with the king's thinking, Charles believed that the monarchy's greatest strength had always been its ability to provide continuity during uncertain times. Governments change. Political movements rise and fall. Public opinion shifts from one generation to the next, yet the crown remains. That sense of permanence has long been one of the institution's defining characteristics. For Charles, preserving that stability appeared to be a central objective. His decision was rooted in the belief that the monarchy must continue serving as a steady presence regardless of the challenges surrounding it. That conviction had been shaped by decades of experience. Few people have spent as much time preparing for leadership while simultaneously observing it from close range. Charles witnessed moments of national celebration and periods of profound difficulty. Through all of it, one lesson remained constant: stability matters. In moments of uncertainty, people look for institutions they can trust. They look for symbols that endure when everything else appears to be changing. The king's decision reflected his belief that protecting that sense of continuity was more important than satisfying expectations or preserving familiar assumptions. At the center of his thinking was William. More than anyone else, the future king represented the next chapter of the monarchy's story. Reports suggest Charles spent considerable time reflecting on the reign he hoped his son would one day lead. He understood the challenges William would face. The world was evolving rapidly. Public expectations were changing. The relationship between institutions and society was being constantly redefined. Preparing William for that future required more than simply passing down tradition. It required ensuring that the institution itself remained strong enough to adapt. The influence of Queen Elizabeth's example remained impossible to ignore. Throughout her reign, she consistently placed duty above personal preference. She understood that leadership often required sacrifice, even when those sacrifices were painful. Charles spent a lifetime watching that philosophy in action. As he considered the future of the crown, many believed he was guided by the same principle. The monarchy could not survive by serving individual interests. It survived by serving something larger than any one person. That idea became increasingly important as Britain entered a new era. The role of the monarchy today is not identical to what it was decades ago. Society has changed. Expectations have changed. The institution itself continues to evolve. Charles reportedly recognized that reality. Rather than resisting change entirely, he appeared focused on managing it carefully. His goal was not to abandon tradition, but to ensure that tradition remained relevant within a modern world. That balance between history and adaptation became a defining feature of his vision. As those closest to the king examined his reasoning, another theme emerged repeatedly: sacrifice. Not sacrifice imposed on others, but sacrifice accepted as the price of responsibility. Throughout royal history, the greatest tests of leadership often demanded difficult choices. Personal desires had to yield to larger obligations. Family interests sometimes had to be weighed against institutional needs. Charles's decision reflected that same tension. It acknowledged that duty is rarely comfortable, but it remains essential. Gradually, a powerful lesson began to emerge from the entire situation. Leadership is not measured by how easily decisions are made. It is measured by the willingness to make difficult decisions when circumstances require them. The king's choice was controversial to some, surprising to many, and emotionally challenging for nearly everyone involved. Yet it was rooted in a belief that the future must sometimes be protected through actions that are uncomfortable in the present. For William, understanding that lesson changed everything. The confusion that had initially surrounded his father's decision slowly gave way to clarity. The shock remained. The emotional weight remained. But he was beginning to understand the deeper purpose behind it all. And as that understanding grew, so did his sense of readiness for whatever came next. And as William reflected on those words, he began to see the path forward in a completely different light. The moment that initially appeared to break William may ultimately become the moment that defines him. Because sometimes the heaviest burdens reveal the strongest leaders. In the weeks that followed, something began to change. The uncertainty that had once seemed overwhelming did not disappear, but it slowly transformed into something else. Understanding, resolve, purpose. The same revelation that had left William shaken was now forcing him to confront the future with a clarity he had never possessed before. The road ahead remained difficult, but for the first time since that private meeting with his father, he was beginning to see it not as an impossible burden, but as a responsibility he was destined to carry. The transformation did not happen overnight. Moments of doubt still surfaced. Questions still lingered. The emotional weight of the king's decision remained as real as ever. Yet William increasingly understood that leadership rarely arrives in a comfortable form. History had never demanded perfection from those who wore the crown. It demanded resilience. It demanded sacrifice. Most of all, it demanded the willingness to place duty above personal comfort. The future king was beginning to embrace that reality with a determination that reflected everything his father had hoped to teach him. Throughout that journey, Catherine remained one of the most important sources of strength in his life. During periods of uncertainty, she continued providing the stability that had helped guide the family through countless challenges. Her support became more than reassurance. It became a reminder of what truly mattered. Together, they represented continuity during a moment of transition. While the future seemed uncertain to many outside observers, their partnership offered a glimpse of the stability that would eventually carry the monarchy forward. Across the wider royal family, adjustments gradually began taking place. The shock that had initially followed the king's decision slowly gave way to acceptance. Conversations shifted from speculation to preparation. Family members who had struggled to understand the reasoning behind the decision began recognizing the larger vision it represented. Not every concern disappeared. Not every question was answered. But a growing recognition emerged that the monarchy was entering a new chapter, and that chapter required unity rather than resistance. At the center of it all stood King Charles. the decision that had sparked so much debate was already becoming one of the defining elements of his legacy. What many initially viewed as a surprising move increasingly appeared to be the culmination of a lifetime spent observing the institution he loved. His years as heir, his experiences as king, and the lessons passed down from Queen Elizabeth had all contributed to this moment. Whether people agreed with his choice or not, few could deny the conviction behind it. Charles had acted according to what he believed would best protect the crown's future. As that future gradually came into focus, preparations for the next era of the monarchy accelerated. The institution remained rooted in tradition, yet it was also adapting to the realities of a changing world. New responsibilities were emerging, new expectations were forming, and a new generation was preparing to take its place at the center of royal life. The transition was not defined by sudden revolution but by careful evolution, guided by the belief that survival depends on both continuity and renewal. Through every stage of the story, one lesson continued to surface again and again. Duty matters, sacrifice matters, service matters. These principles had shaped generations of monarchs long before Charles and William, and they would continue shaping generations yet to come. The crown had endured because individuals were willing to place something larger than themselves at the center of their decisions. That truth remained as powerful now as it had ever been. For William, the path ahead was no longer hidden behind uncertainty. Challenges still awaited him. Difficult decisions still lay ahead. The responsibilities of leadership would only grow heavier with time. Yet he now understood something that had once seemed impossible to grasp. The burden he carried was also a privilege. It connected him to centuries of history, generations of sacrifice, and a legacy larger than any single individual. And so the story that began with fear and uncertainty ultimately became something very different. It became a story about preparation, about responsibility, about a father attempting to secure the future, and a son learning what it truly means to inherit it. The mystery surrounding the king's decision may have captured attention, but the deeper story was always about the values that sustained the monarchy through its most difficult moments. What began as a whispered conversation behind palace walls ended as a defining moment in royal history, one that may shape the destiny of the throne for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.